This is Peter. Today I'm in Washington DC outside some White House, and what I want to talk about is time realities in cinema. This goes very nicely with my Vienna time video, which is basically covering the fact that the scenes have a certain amount of time. Of course they do. This is one of the few mediums which deals with time in this way, in that you're sculpting with time, as Andrei Tarkovsky would say. But when you look at it on a more technical level, how do you actually edit those scenes down so that, say, what if one scene was 2 minutes, or what if that same scene could be edited to be 5 minutes? It depends on what you capture on location, of course it does, but planning for this is really important, I think, because when you start to sculpt with time, your films just end up a little bit better. But you can't exactly go in and adjust, for example, you can't say, I'm going to make every single shot a minute long or every single shot 10 seconds long. You've got to, because it doesn't really work in that way. I know it sounds like you're working to a beats per minute like that, and sometimes when you're lucky you can do that to create a kind of rhythm with your cuts, but that isn't as important, in my opinion, as rhythm within motion, because you've got motion going on within the frame the entire time, so you are constantly changing the beats per minute with the amount of motion in the frame. It's difficult to therefore edit that into your own beats per minute through the editing and try and hook your audience that way, because there are tricks you can employ which or you're trying to trick your audience, and then there's the stuff which is actually effective. And I hope, if anything I do with this channel, is to kind of release and understand the ideas of what is actually effective, as opposed to maybe what is a gimmick which often never works. If you take a film like Boyhood, a film like Born Identity, two very different films there, but they're both playing with time in different ways, and that was their intention to. I know in the kind of establishing shots of Born Identity, you've got the train coming in, you've got him asleep on the train, and it has to be a slow start in order for you to acclimatise to that kind of rhythm of the film, so that maybe the more ramped up stuff is to show a different kind of life, a different kind of mentality, a different personality maybe. Say with a film like Chungking Express, you've got the first 10 minutes in order to tell a story, and you want to do all these impressionistic fancy camera moves and still get it under 10 minutes, because you've got to carry on, because you've got to get things going. You've got to have these freeze frames to get information across, quick storytelling. And it's all very well saying these terms like quick storytelling, but how do you actually do it? Where is that idea coming from? Is it coming from your dreams? Is it coming from your memories as a child? Is it coming from just, let's say that we're going very superficial and just because it's cool, right? Because something is cool. Even if you're doing something cool, it can still be slow cinema. So let's take it, let's, ignore all the fancy, pretentious bullshit that you might associate with Andrei Tarkovsky, even though I don't. Or David Lynch. Let's take it from, we're trying to do a cool Tarantino scene, and I'm not saying he doesn't think deeply, but what I'm saying is that, let's say you're trying to do a cool kind of shootout in this square or something, but you want the pace to, like something like Heat, the bank robbery scenes in Heat, for example, and you want the pace to be kind of slow enough that you actually engage with the world and engage with the atmosphere, but fast enough that because it's a bank robbery, because you're showing something which should in its nature be very fast. We don't have time to piss about, maybe they could in something like Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, where you have time to really edge your stuff out. And plus, if you're dealing with long form TV, you're going to have the ability to stretch things out a lot longer, so it is useful for that. Whereas a 2-hour film, there's only so much time you can actually dedicate to slow cinema before your audiences are maybe going to get bored. So first you got to know what your film is, whether it's an hour 30, whether it's an hour 20, whether it's 2 hours, whether it's 3 hours. You're not always going to know, of course, but it's good to know basically how much of a story you want to tell and how much time you need to dedicate to something. So maybe in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, we deal with that whole idea of the ranch and having that whole scene, which takes a while to get through. You will always notice that some scenes take 20 minutes, and then the next 5 minutes feels like, 5 20-minute scenes, but they're all pretty quickly, and then before you know it, you're at another 20-minute scene. So you're dealing with rhythm quite effectively there throughout your films. And yeah, this is maybe a format. You could take this and you could say, well, Pete, now that you've shown me the format, 20 minutes, break, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, I could do things like that. Or I could do, even in a scene, I could do, 1 minute shot there, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 1 minute, 5 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 1 minute. You don't need to do that. You do what you cut on the emotion. You cut when you feel you have to, a lot of the time. So it isn't right to kind of create a format, create some kind of formula. It's like it's cheating for a reason, I think. And it's not very beneficial in the long run for some kind of emotional storytelling. There is no blueprint to make Chungking Express. And even with the storyboards, you can't really tell. So if you're being strict to the storyboards, that is being true to your cinematic language, which you developed. But when you look at a storyboard, you're probably going to have some kind of idea of how long that shot's going to be vaguely. Maybe with a bit of dialogue it could go on. If you're going to improvise, it could go on. But say you got a shot of this square and you get one guy walking from one side to the other, and that ain't gonna be done in 2 seconds. It's gonna be done in about 10 seconds, 20 seconds, maybe 40 seconds if he takes his time, if he stops, if the actor decides to look up at the White House, for example. And so and it is right to play about on set with how long, because the more footage you have in the can, probably the better. If you've got it in a place where you've chosen this shot, you have spent time setting up this shot, so get the most out of it whilst you're here. Because chances are, even if you were to come back for a reshoot, if it's a great shot, you're never going to get that perfect composition again, and even if you come back, it's going to be slightly different. So if you feel like it's a great shot, if you feel like it's purposeful for your film, do not waste it. Try and get everything going on that you can that's towards that scene that you're basically playing about. You're seeing what things work and what things don't, and maybe you don't have to go crazy. You don't have to start dancing in front of the frame or something, getting your actor to invent a whole new scene, but you can try out a few different walks to maybe uncover something about the character when you get into the edit. If we're talking about score, then throughout it's difficult, this one, because I like to create the score before the shoot, and then come through, basically film the scenes, ignoring the score really, but having it in the back of my head as a beats per minute, as a rhythm. And then once you get into the edit, you reapply that score and then see where you stand with it. And that's very useful for kind of staying true to what you wanted from the very beginning, having that anchor towards it, but also allowing the shoot and the production to go off in a new direction, and then to come back and kind of see what we have. It doesn't work so well sometimes with the whole aspect of found footage, this idea that every shot that you get from a film, from Werner Herzog, Masterclass, that every shot that you get from a film should then be like you found the camera in a bush or something, you found the tapes in a bush, and then you take it home and go, what's this? How can I make a film out of it? Rather than traditionally what everyone from film school will do, which is shoot something from their storyboard, get it home, put it into the editing machine and look through the footage, rushes I should say, and then decide to edit it the way that they always had planned, which is the most dangerous sentence in the world. Go back, listen to that sentence. They decide to edit it the way that they planned it, and it's a different film now. It's not even your film anymore. Not in a kind of like it's someone else's, in a kind of this thing which you found. Your service now is to finish it. Your service now is to work with what you've got, maybe add on to it, although that can be dangerous as well, by kind of, just keep adding different ingredients. You've made this meal, and all you got to do now is eat it. So that, I would say, is the basics of playing with time. Is the kind of scene by scene thing. When you take it to like the whole film and how you plan on moving from scene to scene and get through it, it's from your story, it's from the script. Hopefully you've got a script, or if you're writing a script with time in mind, which you really should be doing, is thinking about how you're going to subtly, like The Irishman, like Boyhood, change scenes, or even something which doesn't deal with age like Goodfellas, just change those scenes in a way which is subtle and get through the story, because that's what makes it subtle, is that it's just the story progressing. It can go off in a different direction, you can even do cross-cutting, but really I think some of the most effective ones I see is things like Goodfellas, where you can't even remember the order of that film. Even if you've watched it a million times, you can't remember every single scene which comes after the other, because there are so many and they go into each one so gracefully, from that kind of, well, now Henry's doing this and then Henry's doing that, and it's not that kind of, once upon a time a guy went down to the forest and then he picked an apple and then he ate the apple. It's not as simple as that. It's mixing in different characters and different situations more than anything, because in life it isn't a case of you're just following one person. You can have films like that, like After Hours or something, Before Sunrise, where you're following these people and it kind of does make sense what scene comes after that. But what I'm really talking about is going around and shooting life on film. So I'm just going to talk about quick cuts in order to work your way through time. So jump cuts, basically, with the most famous ones being such as like the Stanley Kubrick Neanderthal bone in the air to a space station. How many years have passed in that one cut? Which is the most obvious choice, which everyone always picks. Something which I always love is Chunking Express, whereby you've had a whole entire story following this group of people, so the audience places their mind that this film takes place in this time span, and it probably is going to end in that time reality as well. It's not going to go any further. It's not going to flashback. And this is where you can play with people, because all you're really doing is telling a story like you're writing a novel. And if you can do it in a novel, you can do it in a film like Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction. With Chunking Express, what I love about the film is that you followed this love story to the point where naturally now the only choice is to go into the future and see where they are now. And so they go a year into the future, quite bookended, quite poetic. Not that you're aiming to be bookended or poetic, but it's nice when it does work. When after the fact, when people can look at it in retrospect and go, that was very poetic. I think when you get to the end there and you see her come back from a year's time and you see her go back to the same place, and it really says something about how time affects people, about how this period of her life was one thing, it was very important. It's almost like that year we didn't see was so unimportant that it didn't need to be seen. And that's the power of film. That's what it can do. It can make you think something like that just by one cut. And if you had that kind of cut at every single scene in your entire film, somehow it was that impactful, that kind of great use of cinematic language in different ways. It doesn't have to be about time in a year's time has passed, but if you can use that in a shorthand in a short-term thing where you're just kind of like Robert De Niro goes to one side of the room and now we see him suddenly on the other. Why have they done that? That's in the space of one scene. You can do that in the space of one cut from another, from a close-up to a wide. You can get that across. You can do it through fades. You can do it through all the fancy tricks, camera movement. Of course, you can show this kind of effect of like the life and death of Colonel Blimp, or Citizen Kane, where we swipe to Charles Foster Kane. I mean, that film was kind of like the birth of it wasn't the birth of, but it was cinematic language at its very best, which people study, of course. So I'd say the key to this is to watch films and then just have it come to you. I mean, I suppose I'm not so good as other people and remembering certain films and certain cuts and then putting them in. Some people might say I am, but whatever. I think that the real talent, which isn't really a talent, it's just that I watched films. It's not difficult to sit and watch a 2-hour film 3 times a day for 2 years. It's one of the easiest things that anyone could do, and if you're into it, then you're gonna bloody love it probably. Yeah, you get bored, but this is something you gotta do, I think, in order to let it sink in. You don't have to remember everything. You don't have to love the film that you're watching. You could just notice that one cut happened to be amazing, and then that cut it won't even be there in your conscious mind when it comes to shooting, when it comes to storyboarding. You'll just know that it's in your arsenal now, that it's in your toolbox to be able to apply that to a certain scene. It's not like you'll think of it and then go, oh, that cut. You'll just go that shot to that shot. But the more that you know, the better that your editing is going to be. The more that you have in there, in the arsenal and in the toolkit, the better that you're going to be able to write scripts as well, because you're going to be writing from an editor's point of view, from a cinematographer's point of view. And you can also direct your actors better, because you're going to know better than they are, that a certain movement when they get to the end of the shot is going to help you into the next shot. Now, the danger here is that an over-reliance on cinematic language to get the job done, whereas you don't have to necessarily have a certain kind of fancy move or something, a fancy kind of like swish or something in order to get things done. These are just gimmicks a lot of the time. And also, especially if it hasn't got purpose to it. If it's got purpose to it, yeah, it works. But, if I just do that as a swipe and into the next scene, what the hell is that? So, you don't have to have gimmicks. And even if they work, sometimes it just doesn't feel right. And if it doesn't feel right, don't do it, even if it's your only option. It's better to just have a bad cut than it is to do something deliberately bad because you feel like it's your only option, but it's better than just having a normal kind of cut, I guess. You should be looking at every single frame in your edit, seeing for these cuts, because they're not going to become aware to you just by watching your footage, and just by kind of saying, oh, I'll cut there, for example. I don't think that's how you do it. You've got to go through it frame by frame sometimes, in a place where you feel like everything else adds up, and then cut on the emotion a lot of the time. Whatever the emotion of it, whether it's the emotion of the certain character at that point, whether it's the rhythm of the atmosphere of the scene, whether it's I don't know, it can be quite a lot of things, and whether it's the music sometimes, which will take you there because it is aiding you. But to rely on something which isn't character is a dangerous thing. To rely on something which isn't emotion is a dangerous thing. Walter Merck has a great book, In the Blink of an Eye, where he talks about the different types of cuts and how an emotional cut is the most effective. And then it will go back to maybe what is a weak cut, so maybe like a spatial cut. An establishing shot can be an example of a cut which isn't really necessary. A lot of the time you don't need establishing shots at all in order to tell your story. They're just there because that's how it's always been done, because you want to establish the geography of the location. Well done. Was it that important? Was the atmosphere that you got out of that worthwhile, or was it actually a waste of 5 seconds? It can be so easy, and it takes a long time to learn this, that 5 seconds can ruin your entire scene, can ruin your entire film sometimes. If it is, say, like an establishing shot. If I was making a show like, let's think, what great show can I think of in front of the White House? The West Wing, right? If I'm making a show like the West Wing and I do an establishing shot, as they have done, of the White House, why have I done that? Is it just to fill up because I've got to make 45 minutes? Or is it because, I'm trying to... obviously they know where it's going to be, and does it even matter sometimes where it's going to be? Do you need to show Ethiopian mountains in a film to show that you're in Ethiopia? Probably not. But if you're trying to be atmospheric, if you're trying to use the lighting and the sound in order to get your audience in the headspace that they need to be on your beats per minute, then yes, it is effective. Yes, it is important to get that shot, to use it in. You've got to know this before you even show up to shoot, so that you know that that's why you're shooting it, that that's what's important to capture, so that you don't just shoot anything.